Robbie Forgotten, Chapter 6. The rising sun glinted off the airship as it hung in Earth's stratosphere. The dawning light illuminated the inside of the gondola and made it glow white and gold. Sportacus's eyes snapped open just as the light reached him, and his mustache twitched with a spreading grin for the arrival of a new day. Sportacus threw the covers back as he sat up in bed. He let out a sigh and stretched his arms over his head, then side to side, limbering up from his rest. In one great lunging motion, he launched himself out of bed and flipped head over heels to land in a handstand in the center of the deck before somersaulting onto his feet, chuckling all the while. "What the heck are you doing?" Robbie's alarmed squawking startled Sportacus into spinning round to look back over. The skinny man lay sprawled out in his makeshift bed on the floor, staring blearily at the antics of the elf. He didn't appear amused at having a tumbling routine over his head for a wake-up call. "Oh, good morning, Robbie," Sportacus said. "Sorry, I forgot you were down there." "You do get started early," Robbie grumbled and rubbed at his eyes. Sportacus halted his calisthenics as not to disturb his guest any longer, standing far more subdued now. "So how are you feeling today?" Sportacus asked delicately. "Do you remember anything yet?" "I remember how much I need a bath," Robbie said as he attempted to smooth back his hair. His normally styled and sleek coiffure was a bit stringy and unkempt now. The lanky man looked rumpled all over, in fact, his clothing thoroughly wrinkled and dirty from all of yesterday's exertions. Robbie squinted around the airship for a moment before looking up at Sportacus again. "You don't have a tub on this blimp of yours, do you?" "I'm afraid not," Sportacus said. Robbie shook his head, not looking surprised, but no less unhappy about it either. Sportacus thought quickly and raised a finger. "But I know someone who does." He took a few steps further across deck and shouted, "Table!" The airship responded automatically with a small table rising up from the floor. A sheet of paper and a pen lay resting on its surface. Robbie watched with mild curiosity as Sportacus knelt down and jotted a hasty note. By the time Robbie had eased himself up on his feet, the hero was already folding the letter, but not to fit into an envelope. Rather, he seemed to be folding it into a paper airplane. Robbie paused and squinted like his eyes were failing him as he watched Sportacus tuck the airplane into a bowling ball of all things next. "In you go," Sportacus hummed to himself as he tapped the letter all the way into the ball. He slipped his fingers into the traditional grip and cocked his arm back, transitioning gracefully into a bowler's stance. "And out you go." Sportacus threw the bowling ball down the length of the airship, and Robbie jumped to one side with a gasp. He stared after it, gaping as a perfectly sized chute slid open in the airship's hull to accept the hurtling object just in time. The airplane letter soared out of the ship and glided downward towards LazyTown. "What was that all about?" Robbie asked. Sportacus dusted his hands and stood up from the table as it descended back into the floor. "Just seeing if our friends can help us out," Sportacus said, grinning. "While we wait, why don't we have a nice healthy breakfast?" At least carrots were off the menu in the morning, but Robbie had plenty other fruits and vegetables to contend with for the most important meal of the day. His stomach gurgled and churned at the tomatoes, apples, and orange juice set before him. With Sportacus seated across from him, however, he chomped through the roughage and gulped down the juice. The blue-clad man spent less time on breakfast himself and more time watching his hungry house guest, his brow raised in silent approval. A small metal canister suddenly shot up out of the floor, and Sportacus reached out one hand, catching it without a second thought. He unscrewed the capsule and pulled out a rolled sheet of paper. Robbie took advantage of the interruption to shove his plate away. The small smile that always seemed to lurk on Sportacus's face spread wider. "We're in luck," Sportacus said. "There's a hot bath ready for you at Stephanie's house, and they'll even give your clothes a wash, too." "What are we waiting for, then?" Robbie rubbed his hands together eagerly. "Let's go." Sportacus nodded and tucked the letter back in its canister. The table receded back into the wall, and with breakfast adjourned, the two men headed for the lift platform. "Down!" Sportacus commanded. The platform shuddered and jerked into action as the airship obeyed, and Robbie tightened his grip on the lift pole. As the cold air rushed in around their legs from outside, however, the The lanky man tensed up even more. He stared down at the great blue expanse of the sky opening below his feet. "Wait," Robbie sputtered out. His arms wrapped tighter around the pole as they were lowered out of the ship into the wide open, and the wind whipped at them with a brisk pull. Sportacus halted the descent of the platform. "What's wrong?" Sportacus asked. "Did you forget something inside the airship?" "Yes," Robbie squeaked through his teeth. "I forgot. I'm afraid of heights." "But Robbie, we have to go down," Sportacus said. "We can take the lift or the ladder, whichever you like." "I don't like either," Robbie cried. He closed his eyes tightly against the yawning emptiness of the air around him. "I'm too young to fall. I can't do this. Please, take me back up." Robbie had gone completely pale in the frigid wind, and Sportacus put a hand on his shoulder to steady his shaking. Without further argument, the high-flying hero commanded the platform back up into the gondola. As soon as the chamber pressurized again and the wind stopped audibly howling, Robbie went limp against the lift pole with a gasp. "Are you okay?" Sportacus asked. "I'm fine," Robbie managed to say between tight breaths. The color slowly returned to his face, and he frowned at the other man. "Don't try to make me do that again." "You didn't seem to have much trouble coming up yesterday," Sportacus said. "Coming up is easier than going down," Robbie snapped, but he lacked any venom in his tone. He turned sharply away from Sportacus, hiding the red tinge in his face that couldn't be accounted for by the cold air alone. But there was nowhere in the airship for him to hide his shame. "Isn't there any other way?" he asked in a low mutter. Sportacus rubbed his chin as he considered their options. Eventually he decided, and walked away from Robbie towards the front of the airship, heading for the cockpit. "I can land the airship," Sportacus said. "It's not something I'd normally do, but it won't hurt anything to do it for one day." Robbie peered over his shoulder after the mustachioed man. "Really?" he asked. Sportacus shot him a reassuring grin before hopping into the pilot's seat. "Of course," Sportacus said. "Anything for my best friend. Now hold on tight." Sportacus set to pedaling and took hold of the steering wheel, angling the ship smartly down towards the town. Robbie grabbed onto the lift pole again and swung around it in a full rotation before regaining his footing. It startled something like a laugh out of him. Sportacus laughed with him.